All right, welcome everybody
Excellent.
to InfoGov Day 2023, and welcome to this session on selecting an information governance consultant. My name is Jesse Wilkins. I'm the principal at Athro Consulting, and joining me today is Ann Gore, legal technology consultant and IG strategist at Ann Gore LLC, and Ann K. Snyder, information governance consultant and principal at IG Standard LLC. So welcome to the session.
Thank you.
Go ahead, next slide, Ann.
Thanks.
The focus of today's session, I think, is really to sort of share what we've learned over the years, both as in some cases as end users selecting consultants, but also as consultants, some of the things that we've seen organizations maybe struggle a little bit with in terms of not only selecting a consultant, but selecting a right consultant. So we're going to approach this kind of looking at these three things. What do you need to do before you select a consultant? Where can you go to find one? And then finally, how do you figure out that right match between, some random who shows up at your doorstep or in your inbox and somebody who can actually help you do the work you need to do? So let's get started. All right, so I thought we'd start by talking about really what are the goals of selecting a consultant? Why do you need one? And Ann Gore, we as we were putting this together, we had the issue with the two Anns. So I'm not being overly formalistic when I say Ann Gore or Ann Snyder. It's just I don't want to say Ann and Ann or some other random name. So Ann Gore.
You can just call me Snyder. You can call me Snyder.
Don't call me
so
Gore.
Much better. So Ann, how would you approach this in terms of coaching somebody on what they need to know before they select a consultant?
Well, I think it comes always back to the basic of basics, that you need to make sure that you've got you've got your business requirements in line. You know where you're going, what you're doing, and not in the finite, skinny sense of the word, but just what's my bigger picture? Do I need someone to do? Oftentimes, as we find, and I find coming in, someone says, "Ann, I need you to come over here and help me with getting us to a paperless office." And I'll be like, "Yeah, but what about all this other stuff over here?" Right? Like, paperless office is probably about 20th on your list if you don't have these other things done. So I think really you don't go into this blind and say, "Hey, I don't have enough people, or I don't have enough hands." And that is often true for many of us. We're asked to do more with less, but you kind of need to figure out what you're working with now, what your pitfalls are, like the pain points, and where you'd like to be. And that doesn't require a knowledge of all the details behind the curtain, right? That just needs to give you a framework from which you can work so that you're making sure you're going to be selecting someone that can help you with those things, and not just the paperless office that you said you needed. Because the person that knows what's going on is going to say, "Well, all right, well, let's do this, but we're going to put this in order." So it's not on you to know everything, right? You got to know some stuff, some of the basics. And Snyder?
Yeah, I think that there's that preliminary step. So I think that there are some people who are certainly, I find clients of mine more advanced in some instances, and others who just are starting. They think they're starting on this project, but there are 16 other things that they really need to handle first. So I do think you can also bring people in to help you structure that first level of understanding of what your requirements are. Like, where do I get started? So if you have an IG person on staff who has a plan, that's a better starting point. You can be much more focused. But if you are really just starting, you don't know, what should come first, you can ask people to come in, and my organization does maturity assessments, and I'm sure others do too, to say these are the hot button issues that you have to address today, and help you give a priority to those things that you're tackling.
Yeah, I think it's really and you hit it on the head that so many people out there don't know what they don't know, and they really don't have an idea of where to begin. Hence this session, right?
And go backwards. There
Yeah.
you go.
I think the other thing is that
Sorry about that.
we have this sort of annoying tendency in the consulting world to think that we can do everything, and in fact, old seasoned consultants sometimes will say, "You should always say yes, you know how to do what you're doing, and then figure it out." That's not what the client needs, right? They need to understand what they need in terms of what are the gaps in the skill sets that they have, right? What, just because they have people who can do things doesn't mean that they can do the things that need to be done. And I think it's also interesting to kind of look at this from are you really filling in a gap that they don't have in their skill sets? Or is it really more along the lines of staff augmentation, right? It may be that they know what to do. They just don't have the hours in the day to do it because they're putting out fires, 24/7. So I think, yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jerry, Jesse. I want to say that the consultant that tells you they can do everything, that's kind of a scary person. That should be a red flag for you right away. I could wax your car, but I'm not going to do a good job at it, right? So I'm not, choose somebody that is honest enough to tell you what they do and don't know, or where their skills and weaknesses are. Because as a good consultant, you should have a whole set of arrows in your quiver, right? Like you should be able to say, hey, this isn't my expertise, but I could call Ann Snyder and she could do that very well for you, right? Or I could call Jesse and he could put that program together for you. Wherever that is, I've gotten into plenty of projects where someone said, we chose you because you said you couldn't do something, but you had people that would help you get to that point. And you can't be all things to all people, right? And that's rule number one as selecting a consultant. I know we want to try to limit how many people are in the pool, right, and have everybody stick to their swim lane. But sometimes you need a blend of people to get to the finish line.
Yeah, I think that's right. Go ahead, Ann.
I absolutely agree with that. So I certainly, I had to do that the other day. Someone reached out to me and I said, wait, you're somebody else who's this is this person's wheelhouse, and I can do it. So I could say, sure, I can do it. But I think it's always good to be able to reach out to people who have specific expertise, and I think we're a pretty well connected community. And I think that's the advantage of being sort of small and nimble as a company, being able to bring in those other people.
Okay. Anything else before we move on to sort of getting into the meat of how to go about finding somebody?
No, I think we've hit on the, the only thing we hit on the skill sets, we hit on the external resources. That you are an external resource, but it's something you had shared in our prep time, Jesse, that that you're an external resource. That should mean that you're finite. That should mean that you're going to be there to share the information with them, get them over the finish line, help where needed, and then move on to the next project. For the person that goes in hoping that they're going to be a full-time consultant employee of the organization, that's not, that happens to me quite frequently, which is fine. They keep coming back to me for more, help me in another area. But I'm not envisioning that I'm there all the time and that I'm going to milk that client for lots and lots of billable hours, because really I should be able to do the project I was asked to do, wrap it up, put a pretty bow on it, give them their materials, make sure everything's working, and move on to the next project. So they should be viewed as an external resource, and that would mean it's finite, right?
Yeah. The only thing go ahead, Ann.
Sorry, a potential exception to that would be sort of, a model that we occasionally use and we've had people approach us about would be, having someone on retainer for like a staff augmentation kind of approach.
Right.
Just, hey, we're rolling, but you're rolling into the next project. You're not the idea of lingering on a project is not good. And also even within a project, because it's sometimes hard to scope them because you don't know what you don't know. I like to take a phased approach. So we're going to do this nugget with this deliverable. So at the end of that portion of the project phase, whatever we call it, you are clearer along your roadmap. You have a clearer understanding of where you are than your start point. And if you don't like me, you don't like our group, you can say thank you. We're going to go with somebody else, and that's fine. But I think that doing that, there should be definite deliverables, clear expectations set, so it's just not this lingering open engagement.
Yeah, and the last thing I would leave, and I think we're actually jumping ahead a little bit, but I think that's okay because it came up. I think it's also important that you teach a man to fish, right? Rather than just giving him deliverables, teach him or her how to build and sustain and mature that on their own. I'm not a real big fan of consultants that kind of jump in with their proprietary XYZ methodology, and then you have to keep them on because they're not telling you how to do it yourself moving forward. I'd rather leave them with, oh, now we know how to move forward and let's drive on. And if I can work myself out of a job, that's not a horrible thing, I don't think. Okay, where do we find these people? Anne, next slide, please.
All right, give me 1 second.
So where do we go to find an IG consultant? And again, Anne Gore, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, there's a plethora of places you could be going, right? Right here is a great place, quite honestly. You know, we're surrounded. When I was looking in that room, they're surrounded by and I couldn't get in or out. So I'm just gonna say the stress factor on my end was very high, as several people heard. But in the room that we're, you know, here at InfoGov Day, you know, this particular session is unique because we have so many, you know, heavy hitters with us today. So whether you're going to a network event or you're, you know, it's someplace new, or it's a dinner event and it's someplace new, or it's someplace where you're comfortable, like here, where you have a whole slew of people to work with, that's a great place to start. But we have, you know, that you could pick the you know, go to any one of the big four, and you know, they have a whole section of people that do what we do. As you found, they used to not be in our space, but now they're in our space big time. So, you know, it depends on what your management team is looking for. They might have a very no. We have to have a Deloitte person, or we have to have a PwC person, or we have to have, you know, an Ernst Young. Like, we have to have somebody big, but you know, that comes with other pitfalls, because when you choose a smaller organization, which I'm not advocating small, large, medium, I don't really, you know, I'm small, but it does, I certainly pass the wealth along to everybody. You often don't get to choose your team. Your team is assigned to you when you're working with bigger organizations. And that's difficult. I'm in the middle of a couple of projects right now, and where I have a team that was assigned to me, and I can't, it's not working. They're not the right fit, but that's who we contracted with. And we got these people who I didn't feel were the A team. Right. So I'm with them, and that's what I got. And you know, and it's not me that picked them, but they got assigned as part of a project. That's a terrible feeling when you know that you're smarter than the people you're paying. That's, you know, that's hard. And then we have, like we said, you know, you've got all these different people in our industries that are here, whether we know them from Info Advocates, InfoGov, whether you know them from AIM or ARMA or ILTA or IAPP or wherever you are. Every one of those organizations has a really deep bench of people that you can, if you don't have that expertise and you need that expertise, they'll be able to give you some names to work with. And then we have the general solutions providers, you know, the people that are our, you know, our business partners in many of these organizations. We have the shiny docs. We have, you know, all the people that work with us as business partners, as, you know, businesses, and they have a staff of people to help get you over the fence.
I want to tie in with that last one real quick, Anne. A lot of people are understandably, I guess, in some cases, leery about going with solution providers because they think that the solution provider is just there, just as we said in the previous slide, to sort of expand the engagement and drive more revenue, and sometimes they are. But I think that's a disservice broadly to solution providers, most of whom are just trying to solve your problem. They really are trying to be trusted advisors and partners in effecting change. And frankly, a lot of the solution providers have hired people like us who maybe don't want to be consultants anymore, who want something a little more predictable, a little more steady state. And so, I mean, I've got probably 20 consultants I can name off the top of my head that now work for solution providers. They're highly skilled, highly trained. They get it because they've been in the trenches with us. And now they happen to be getting a paycheck from, as you said, a Shiny Docs or a Microsoft or somebody. Go ahead, Anne.
But I think that it's really key. You know, it's interesting. Like, some organizations will say they don't want to quote vendor to speak at their conference, and I'll be like, they're not gonna promote themselves. They're gonna promote the discussion. And so, any of our vendors, you know, that are in this room today, whether it's Caligo or FileTrail, Gimel, Shiny Docs, iPro, thank you to all of them. AG Standard, AG, IG. IG Standard, which
IT
I
Standard, Ann, come on now.
it's like Anne's promoting it too. It's her company. But I say AG because that's what my kids call me. Hey AG, when I don't answer to mom, they call me AG, Ann Gore. So all of those people have really deep benches, and they're really, and when they're going to be when you've got a vendor that doesn't fall into that category. All of a sudden they are trying to nickel and dime you for every single thing, for every little piece. So it's very clear that's kind of clear up front when all of a sudden everything is a line item. Now you start getting worried because that if there's these line items on day one, there's probably a book by the time we're finished. So you kind of want to be sure you're looking at the right people.
In regard to the solution providers, I think I've always been surprised at the upset people have about having the vendors, or like that's a bad word or something like that, involved in speaking engagements, speaking events and stuff like that. But certainly once you've made a selection of a particular product, you want to go with someone who has expertise in that particular product, and often the vendors are the absolute right resource for those. So certainly I have the advantage maybe or something, or disadvantage with perspective, at least of being on both sides of it. So certainly I've had to hire outside consultants, and I am one now, and having people who had that specific expertise was invaluable in the deployment of a solution for sure. So
now let's flip that around though too, and I 100% agree, but I think there's also this notion that it probably depends a little bit on what stage of the process you're in, right? In other words, if you know that you're a insert vendor name here shop, and then you want somebody who's got that deep expertise in that, for the tech bits, also for the process, the setting up, all that good stuff, the change management. But if part of the process is selecting a replacement bit, it may be that selecting a replacement for your old deprecated HP trim system from 1995, right? You don't necessarily want somebody who's trim, because they're going to tell you, well, yes, you should totally stay with trim. Not nothing against trim necessarily, but I think there's this difference between having a consultant that can support the tech stack that you already have in place or have decided upon, versus getting somebody that doesn't have those ties, so they can provide you a realistic assessment of, here's your business requirements. These 4 solutions will fit it. This one will sort of fit it. Those 2 absolutely are not a good fit for you. And then being honest enough to be able to share that with you. Right.
And I agree with that. Yeah.
And that goes back to the business requirements. If you don't know what you need to be putting in, maybe you're picking the wrong consulting team, right? And a lot of times it's teams. I come in and I'm working as the information governance consultant, where I'm standing over top of everybody, right? And I get the right teams in at the right spot, and it isn't necessarily me. I'm kind of managing as a traffic cop, or being able to call BS when somebody says, no, we're not doing this, right? So you need somebody that's got a depth and breadth that can handle your project as much as they can to get you, in the right alignment for your end goal.
Yeah, and I think the other group that we sometimes too often overlook, and I think, Ann, you alluded to this at the start of this slide, but your professional network, right? You go to ARMA meetings, you go to AIM meetings, you go to these association events, and in between the sessions, you're talking to people, you're at lunch break, you're in the lobby, you're wherever, you're at the hotel bar after an in-person event, and who are you using? Oh, well, I used this person and they were terrible. I couldn't work with them at all. Or I used this person and they were fantastic. We're going to be using them again, and I'm recommending them to everybody I know. So especially if it's somebody who's in a similar sort of situation as you are, a similar sort of industry, a similar sort of size, pick their brains. Your personal professional network, if I can say that. We have this Slack group where we kind of bounce ideas off of each other periodically, and we get ideas all the time. Oh yeah, this person has this particular really, really weird niche that you need right now, so you should go talk to them. Fantastic, let me go do that.
Right.
And there are certainly industry specific groups too, at the professional organizations. so that you might be able to address, again, your industry niche idea needs, and certainly you should be connected with those. So
yeah. All right. So let's say that we found somebody who claims to be a consultant. Go ahead and flip to the next slide, Ann.
okay,
How do we vet them? How do we make sure that or how would you recommend that clients approach these people to make sure that they're a good fit? And once again, we will start with you, Ann.
I'm a big one on referrals and references, right? Like once you get somebody and you're vetting them, because most of my clients ask for they need to see 3 or 4 people before the partnership decides they're going to go all in on a project. So that same goes in play for you, where you're selecting a consultant. You want to speak to several groups, and you want to either organizations or people, however their business is aligned. But you should go back and check on their references and check. I cannot believe how many people ask for references and then never even pick them up. We've got the credentials. That's a big one, right? What do they have? But there's also, some people that have been in this field for forever. They have lots of credentials. I think Jesse has the biggest alphabet soup with all of us. He's got every certification, I think, known to man and women. But I don't necessarily have the same level of letters behind my name, but that doesn't mean I don't have the same level of expertise. And should I go out and get those? Probably. Do I have the time right now? No, I'm busy working. Right. So that becomes a little bit of a yin and a yang. So, and then I'll let you do the next one, Ann.
Well,
and then too busy doing the work to go out and tell people you can do the work.
Yeah. Well, no. I'm too busy. I'm too busy doing the work and to go take the tests, right? Because I'm doing the work, right? So
right. Go ahead, Snyder.
No, I agree with this. And then sometimes Ann gives me guff for not putting certain letters behind my name that are there, but you might you should put that. Make sure you put that. So yeah, I think that referrals and references absolutely are probably the most important. I'm sorry, am I moving down to sort of understanding?
Yeah, you're moving down.
Understanding of the statement of work and timelines. So I think that that should be, I was just actually working with someone else on just what should go into an SOW. I think those should be really clear and have specific deliverables. There's that unusual situation where it's an exploratory. We're trying to figure out what the problem is and trying to scope it. I have a couple of those out there, and somebody should be willing to help you do that in a shorter, but even that should be a defined nugget of work, number of hours, so you know what to expect, and you can limit those overruns and things like that. But there should be, if it has progressed to a formal project, there should be specific deliverables that are defined that we all agree on. So making sure those things are clearly laid out. And then also, I think timelines are great, but things happen, so there should be some flexibility and willingness to adjust and work without a massive reworking of the SOW or massive contractual. As the lawyer, it's funny that I'm the one who's like, it should be as flexible as possible, but it's just to keep friends during the whole process and prepare for the unexpected, which is going to happen. So
yeah, I think one of the interesting things we talked about in the prep was that and I forget the exact piquant phrase that we put together on it, but the idea was that by the time you see the statement of work, you should have a pretty good idea of whether the consultant you're proposing to work with has any idea what they're doing, right? Do you have specific deliverables? Are they measurable? Do you have specific timelines? Keeping in mind the flexibility, and that you just talked about, but does it read like what you've agreed to and discussed? Does it factor in things like unforeseen events, the need for project management and status reports and check-ins and that type of regular reporting? Even something as simple as what's the process for doing a change request if necessary? I think the other thing that I look at quite a bit, and there's a fine line here. Actually, it's not even that fine a line. You don't want to hire somebody who's just all they do is speak at events, right? They haven't done any work in 20 years, but boy, they know how to talk about what they did 20 years ago. But I do expect that somebody who's an industry professional periodically does some speaking or writing or blogging or podcasting or webinaring, that they're involved with somebody, and that doesn't mean that they have to run for the board of directors of AIM International, but it does mean that they should know who AIM is. If that's the nature of the project, they should know who ILTA is if that's the nature of the project. And when you start talking about things like foundational works and ISO standards and those sorts of things, again, I don't expect somebody to rattle off 32 ISO standards at me, but if I'm doing a records management project, if I'm bidding for a records management project and the client says something about 15489, I think if I don't understand what that is at a high level, that's a pretty big red flag that I may not necessarily know what I'm talking about.
Right. Well, and I think out through all of this is listening, because sometimes people don't really all come to the table with what all the pieces are, and you have to be astute enough as when you're looking for a consultant. Did they pick up on what we're talking about here? Did they understand that the direction of the project might be morphing a bit? Do they have that ability? Do they have the honesty to say, hey, we're going down a different path here, I need to bring somebody else in, right? If they aren't, if it talks about if you talk to anybody that's in a sales role, they buy things from people they know and trust. And you're looking to buy a trusted advisor. You're looking for somebody that's not feeding you a line, not looking to get to the next project. And if you don't finish in 4 weeks, you're not going to be, you're not going to be at the top of the, top of that consultant's food chain. That's not a fun place to be as a client, right? To find out that, hey, well, you scoped that for 4 weeks, it's now extended and they've overbooked themselves and they can't help you. Or they don't have the resources to help you. So it's really key that you find, I want to say a comfortability, like that you're comfortable with what needs to happen, that you're comfortable with their personalities, that you're comfortable with, the way they're presenting this, because if they're not somebody you can deal with, then you got them for a while, right?
Right. I think that sort of moves nicely into that RFI and the RFP for small discovery projects. And I think that we touched on this already. I do really like the idea of doing things in small nuggets. So it makes your, if you've made
the ocean, right?
Right. And if you've made a mistake and mistake, that could be just a right fit. The person isn't the right fit for the size of your organization, the nature of the work you're doing, the scope has changed unexpectedly. They don't get along with your team, etc. You have now created a definable nugget that is a deliverable. So you've at least advanced the project in a meaningful way, and you're not stuck with it for the full deployment. And I think that marking the project off in those individual phases is a way to do that, and to limit some of that. So we certainly try to do that for people, to say this is phase one. These are the phases. This is what we anticipate. This is the amendment this is the SOW for this chunk. And again, that helps us define the project better, because again, we don't know what we don't know until we get into talking to the client, and doing some of that basic discovery.
Yeah, and I think you can do some of that in your initial calls and in your follow-up calls as you're trying to develop the statement of work. But I'm a really big fan of those couple days, week, maybe 2 weeks, not very long projects where it really is kind of a project kickoff and the first steps of it, just to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. And I think it's also important that you recognize that what you're hiring is, I think as both hands have said, a trusted advisor who knows this stuff. And if they're telling you that you're not thinking about this the right way, the client is not necessarily always right? The customer is not necessarily always right. You're hiring us because we have this experience and expertise and wisdom, not necessarily, hopefully, because we're trying to move it in a different direction, but because it looks like it is moving in a different direction. And we want to make sure that everybody's sort of cognizant of that.
Right.
The last point, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, and that is actually one of the things I think we had talked about this in the prep session for this. But one of the advantages of why do you hire an external consultant? I know that's several slides back, but the idea of you get a third party, somebody like an objective outside third party to
Right.
say, no, this is really an issue. Sometimes that can be, if you're working, I certainly have had the situations where I've been working with a person who understands that there's an issue, but it's nice to have it validated by an external party. And that helps them have okay, well, external party agrees that this is also a concern or that these should be our priorities. But it's also, some inevitably in these kinds of engagements, we find something that people didn't know about. So we say this is a hot button issue. You need to take care of this right now. Should be a priority. They may disagree with you on that, but it's an outside party being able to say that to them. It changes perspective, and I think it's a very good change management tool also.
Yeah, the last thing that we wanted to talk about on this slide, and I'm cognizant we're coming up on time. We will have you out of here in time for the next session, I promise.
And figure out how to get to where you're going. So
Yeah.
you're not hyperventilating like Ann Gore was coming in here. Go ahead.
That's right. I think sometimes there's this, for lack of a better term, sticker shock, in that you want somebody to completely revamp your entire program in a week for a couple $100, and that's just not how it works. I think there's, we want to be mindful of cost. We want to be mindful of resources. But if you're talking about work that's going to be a couple of 100 hours a week, that's not one person, right? It's probably 6 or 7 people, depending on their availability and utilization. Similarly, if you're using a larger group, different roles may have different billable rates, different levels, and sometimes you'll have visibility to this and sometimes you don't, depending on the nature of how the work is structured and the statement of work is structured. But I think it's important to understand that part of the thing that you're doing by going to outside people is it's people you don't have to hire internally full-time at a salaried rate with benefits. And so there's I don't want to say a premium to that, but there's a cost associated with that. And being able to have somebody show up at your doorstep for 3 months or 6 months or 9-month project and then leave without having to pay severance, without having to rehire a replacement, anything like that, there's some significant financial benefit to that, as well as just overhead benefit.
If I can add to that, sorry. So this was some advice from Steve Weissman, and he said, well, maybe we can't do, say I'm doing a maturity assessment or a roadmap or something from a high level assessment of your program. The depth I can do, if you want me to do a really, really deep dive, that might be a multi-month project, but it doesn't mean I can't do something for you and get you started. And if we get the right people in the room, I can do a pretty quick assessment of the gaps that I'm seeing, the holes that need to be closed. So if you have a massively limited budget, or sometimes there are budgeting resources, like you could do X without a massive approval process or something like that. Talk to us. There's we can do something typically in a shorter time frame or with a lower budget. It might not be a full excavation or full revamping of your project, but it doesn't mean you can't make progress. And again, that goes back to this manageable nuggets of stuff. So you might be able to get through the a request for information, but not the full implementation of your project. And then but you'll have a clearer sense of where you are and where you're going in that short little time.
I think to add to that, it's when you're selecting a consultant, that's an inside business decision. And you need to be able to sell what it is you're trying to accomplish and why to executive management, why you need those people. And if you're working with, one of our business partners, they have slides. They have this to tell you why, what's the ROI, what's the cost on this, what is it going to take? And they ought to be able to give you tools to identify why you need them versus trying to, navigate that on your own. And so any of the organizations that are on as our vendors today, as our business partners today, they have marketing departments, they have sales tools, they have all kinds of things that will help us get to where we need to get to and support that. And another consultant, if you're coming back to the consultant to say, we really can't afford you. Well, I started asking questions. Why would that be? Can you explain what is it that is the roadblock, right? So don't have to just take. This is something I find very odd. Is if I pull up what you've asked and you haven't given me everything, and I've given you kind of a statement of work, and you just come back and say you're too expensive. What part's too expensive? What piece do you think needs? Because quite honestly, if I'm too expensive, I can tell you the person down the road's too expensive, right? So you have to be able to sell it to your management team, and if you don't have that skill set, then work with the people that you're asking, the consultants that you're proposing come in, and have them write up a value statement as to why you need to spend this, and then what's the benefit, as to what Jesse's points of all the HR and all the HR implications going over that. So now we're on to the, I think this is our last slide.
Well, it is, but I think I'd actually suggest that we move to the final slide with our contact information, and I'm going to ask each of you to give your final parting thoughts.
Oh, can we just say one thing before we get off there? Go back.
Sure.
This is and then we'll skinny on our final parting thoughts, maybe. I'm concerned about contractual considerations, and that comes to me all the time. Is I work in legal, right? I'm the vertical legal, and I'm always stunned at people that don't read the contract. Make sure that whatever, like who read this and who signed off on this, right? But part of selecting the contract is, the vendor is making sure you have a really good contract in place that says, I'm not going to exceed X amount, or if I go over, it's going to be by X percentage, or I'm going to provide you X, Y, and Z. You need to understand what that consulting team is presenting to you as part of the contract. I'm usually sitting in as the owner's agent. I'm usually sitting on the inside working with the outside consultants. And that I always find is very key consideration. And nobody paid attention to that. I'm usually walking in midstream. I'll be like, well, who signed that contract? Right. And aren't you lawyers? Right. So that I think is really key. How do I, if I chose what I thought was the right consultant and they're the wrong consultant, how do I get out of this? How do I stop?
There've got to, I agree. I will, again, I think I've alluded to that several times. There've got to be safety valves in the contract, just date, specific deliverables. It's this part of it's done at this point. We can measure doneness. If it's an open, an open contract, like an ongoing, like IG, outsourced role, that there's an escape clause. Like those should be really clear. They should be easy. It's not it's
take me to court deal.
Right. And people should be, I mean, that related to that is, I do not typically have people I'm working with sign non-competes. I think that if I bring someone on who is awesome or the right fit for you, and you say, hey, Anne, you're a little abrasive. We'd rather go with Jesse. He just fit better with our team, or something like that. And we want to continue engagement. There's plenty of work to be done. It's not there's no need to elbow people out, and I'm always leery of those kinds of things in any kind of agreements that I make with anyone. That's why I'm single. So anyway.
All right, everybody, we're at our time. In fact, we're 1 minute past our time. So to keep this train rolling, we're going to go ahead and let you go for now. Again, I want to thank my panelists, Ann Gore from Ann Gore LLC, Ann Snyder from IG Standard LLC. And hope you have a great rest of the day. We'll be around for the rest of the day. We hope you have a fantastic conference.
I think we can chat with you outside if you want to chat with us outside of this room. I think
see if I can get out of here and figure it out. I don't play video games, so we're
everybody.
All right, sounds good.
Thank
All
you.
right, bye-bye.
Thank you for having us. Now what do we do?